All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Game Dev Show. That was a really weird intro. I don't know what it was doing, but thanks for joining us here today. We got Story and Andrew, and I think we're going to have some interesting discussions. Really want to get into message queues and some graph stuff, and I think it's going to be we'll see how it goes. Before we get started, there were a couple quick announcements. First, Andrew does have a couple assets still on the asset store sale. If you haven't checked them out, the flash sale is going on. They got 70% off deals, and Andrew's still got a couple things at 50% off. It's the character bundles, right?
Yep. And in 3 or 4 days, on the 7th, maybe that's 5 days, I don't know how to count days. On the 7th, there will be the game modules 4 on flash deal. I think that's pretty much, is that the end of the sale? At that point, it's like right at the end of the sale.
Is that one right there? Okay. Yeah. And that's how many days you said?
It's on the 7th. So
oh wow, so like 5 days. Okay, so the sale's almost over. Time to go.
The last day of the sale.
Yeah, definitely go check stuff out. Then if there's only 5 days left, go grab stuff. I've already grabbed a couple things. I did also really quickly want to call out on there too the vtabs, vhierarchy, and all the other tools. I've been using them and forcing everybody else to use them for the last month in a bigger project, and it's been great. I've been enjoying it a lot. They made the tools quite a bit better, and he actually gave me a couple codes. So if you want to drop a comment when the stream is over, or you can chat right now, but after the stream's over, drop a comment and pick one at random to give a vtabs code away to. I was going to do the battler live here, but apparently I broke the code, so we're not going to do that. And instead, we'll just give one away. But it's super handy. It just allows you to take an object, drag it over, kind of like if you inspect, create a new tab and hit the lock button, but all in one, plus like 5 other cool things. And then each one of them does like 5 very useful things. And I say I use like 3 out of the 5 on each one of them. Super handy. Have you guys used these, by the way? Like the vtool stuff?
I have not yet. I think I own them, though. Or
what about you, Story?
Yeah, I've used them. My favorite part of the vtabs especially was the little hover icon they've added to the tab bar. So it literally has a little plus that adds new tabs along the way, which is kind of very elegant.
Yes, being able to go add them that. And I've been using like the multiple copy paste. I've used that a couple times so far. And then the alt drag, where you just take a component window and drag it out. Mm-hmm. That is like the thing that I use the most, because most of the time when I want to lock something, I really don't want to lock it. I just want to see like one component in the inspector and drag something into it, and then you just hold alt, drag that thing off, and it becomes like a little floating window. Super handy. It reminds me a lot of one of the tools that I saw at the last Orange County meetup with Dave too. It was very similar and did something like that, but vtabs just does all of that and a bunch more. So super handy. Any other big news from you guys before we get into the heated debates about graphs and queues?
Nope. I'm not crying, by the way. I just have allergies. So if anyone's concerned about my well-being.
You're stung by bees?
Not crying yet. Wait until we start talking about the state machine stuff.
Yeah.
Before I get going, I did want to mention too, I think, Story, you were open to work opportunities too, right? If something interesting pops up?
Yeah. I had a couple projects finish up. I did a VR project recently, and since then I'm kind of sitting pretty, waiting to see what comes up. Mostly looking for kind of consulting work, but if there's any like full-time jobs too, I'll at least take a look. So feel free to send me a message if you want to have a chat.
Nice. Yeah, if you're looking for a good senior engineer that knows pretty much everything, that's a good opportunity. All right, so the 2 things in the title here. The first one, Story, did you see the video that I did somewhat recently about?
Yes, it got posted in my Discord and caused a lengthy conversation whether or not they agreed with you, which I thought was very funny. I chose to stay out of it. I was just watching instead. It was more entertaining.
Interesting. And what was the consensus, or was there one?
After the big debate, I kind of gave my sarcastic response and said, so basically I could sum up all of you wasting your time with, it depends. It's just basically the usual. Yes. So it's the usual programming story, right? Where it's very hard to give absolutes. I think I only disagreed with you on one thing. I actually left a comment on the video about that. Is that you said, don't feel bad about using find object of type. I still say, That's the devil. It's the devil incarnate. Don't use it. There is literally no reason to ever use it. And if you did want to have the exact same features as it, you can just have a static list of type whatever it is, and on enable add, on disable remove, and you get the exact same features with much faster speeds, no tree walks of any kind. There's zero reason in any universe to ever use find object of type.
He did qualify that, if I'm not mistaken, by saying if you just need to do it real quick and you're going to change it later or something like that, right?
That's generally the rule.
If you're going to change it later, you can just write the other 3 lines of code, which do the thing I say, and change it now. There's no reason to wait till later.
You don't know necessarily that you're the problem that I have with that, with writing you have this list and this thing enabled that got added there, is that when I'm writing that find object of type, I don't know for sure that that's even the thing that I'm going to end up doing. Like I know that I want a reference to that object, but I'm not sure exactly how I want to get that reference.
So if it's temporary, you make it public and you drag it in, and then it's very clearly temporary, and you can remove it when you want to remove it.
No, because then people think it's permanent. If I do a find object of type, then me and everybody else knows, oh yeah, that should get fixed. If I put a field in there, then people think, oh, that's the way that it's supposed to be. So I like to use them. Well, there are 2 situations. I like to use them for that. Like if I just don't know what I want to do, how I want to get the reference yet. Or 2, if it's literally just a thing that there's always going to be there and I haven't made it into a singleton, it doesn't make sense to make it into one. Sometimes I would just leave it because I know it's technically slower, but if it's a one-off call that eats a couple milliseconds and I don't notice it versus me building a thing around it, I'll leave it. But say most of the time, yeah, it's like I mentioned here for prototyping and proof of concept. And then what I do is the find objects of type for me stand out as like a very obvious, okay, this is the part that I still need to figure out. And that's where I like to use it. But yeah, but no, I agree. Generally, you don't want to use it in.
Okay, well, let me just one devil's advocate.
Yeah.
Any use of find object of type that has to be qualified 50 times with no, but I actually remove it in most of those cases, and also I don't really use it, and also I kind of don't recommend it. And well, literally, once you get to that stage, you're fighting that hard to add a thing that you yourself know you should probably remove at some stage. Maybe find a different solution.
But I just don't remove it right away. This thing, like I will leave it in there if it's not. If it doesn't matter and it's not impacting anything, I'll leave it in there until I've figured out the correct solution. Instead of, and that might not be like at the time that I'm coding it. It might be a couple of days later where I'm like, okay, this is how I want to do it because the architecture still hasn't kind of revealed itself to my brain yet.
Yeah, well, again, I feel the same way, and I also make prototype temporary stuff. But the way I do it is I have a single script which runtime initialize unload, instantiates a game object, and then has a single static class on it with the method called get, and then it loads the resources folder and loads everything under it and swipes it under it. So if I ever want anything anywhere, I can just drop a prefab in a single folder, and I can say app.get input, app.get.
What if I got a thing that might not be loaded though? I don't know if it's there.
Yeah, but that's my point, is that I have the exact same level as you do of find object of type. It might not be there, or it might there, or I can add it later. But the difference is it's one place, it's one call, and I'm not walking a tree. So that's my version of temporary. What I'm saying is it's still the same temporary thing I would use, but it's instead of having to walk an entire tree,
core temporary thing there.
And it's one script. I drop it in once, and if I ever want to change it, I can. So I agree with the sentiment of have a temporary thing. But if your temporary solution is, I just want to grab this item, and the way you do that is walking a hierarchical tree structure from top to bottom to find an object, that's just fundamentally at odds with unsensible. The fact that you are building it, you are putting the things into places. It is infinitely smarter to say, take any of them and go put it here, get it from there. If you're placing them, you can get them. There is no reason to search a tree when you are the one putting it there and you are the one getting it, and all the information is available to you. To me, it is insane to walk a tree to find something that you put exactly at a certain place.
Yeah, most of the time they end up just turning into singletons, or single reference afterwards.
I'd even prefer that. I prefer if you default it to singletons, the find object of types.
They almost always, the find objects of type turn into a singleton or something that's referenced there. It's just, like I said, usually before I've figured out where those are and what they are. And if they're not a performance issue, I don't necessarily rush to figure out where they are and what they are. Make sure that the thing actually works. I've done a lot before where like I'll build up this whole system and build all the code around it and then realize that I don't need it and then delete it. And it happened to me thousands of times now, I feel like. So I've gotten to the point where like I just want to write the stuff that I need, and then at the moment of needing. In fact, this actually brings up an even bigger, more important discussion, I think. So I was talking to Lucian Wednesday. We were talking about engineering, architecture, over engineering, and kind of getting to the right level. And he mentioned something, I forget exactly how he phrased it though, about coding for easy refactorability instead of easy extensibility, which I think is generally, it is definitely, not just generally, it is definitely the way that I prefer to write code now. And I'd say like 10 years ago, I would have pushed towards the build it as extensible, make it so that all the hooks are there so that when I need these things in the future, they're there. I found that my personal experience is that when I do that, and when anybody else does that, if it's not something that they've already built before, and this is a version 2, this is the first time doing it, the hooks are always wrong, the architecture is always wrong, and it ends up making it drastically harder to do the things that you want to do because you've pre-designed the system instead of making the system light and less opinionated, where the system can morph into what it actually needs to be. And it depends a lot on, like, if you got super hard, strict requirements, you know exactly what you're going to build, it's easier. With enterprise stuff, and that was always the past, kind of where I got it from. In enterprise stuff, you knew like, hey, this needs to do this, these things need to work here, this is our timeline, that's it. With games, there's never been like that. It's always that we're going to do this, oh, this isn't fun, oh, this isn't fun, and it keeps changing till you get to the final thing. And that is never, in my experience, where it's been a situation where the final game ended up being the original design, right? It's always rather drastically different. So I'm curious, have you discussed that, either one of you discussed or thought about that before? The concept, and I guess just the wording of coding for refactorability over extensibility.
I hadn't heard of that before. Recently, since I'm trying to sell assets, I try and make things very extensible because I want people to be able to, if they so choose, make their own extensions and whatnot. So I had not heard of that before.
That's a situation I think it makes sense too.
Sure.
Like that's
I honestly, it's kind of like you were saying about as your opinion changes over time. Mine is fairly, at the moment, it's fairly consistently the same thing, and it has been for about, I don't know, about 5-6 years, where it's been, I just write the code I want to use. And if code makes me feel icky, I don't write that code. And if code is good enough for now, I write that code. I write the code I want to use. And I don't think it needs to be any more complicated than that. Like if I write code and it is using a long, complicated set of interfaces, I'll feel exhausted going, oh, I forgot what the thing to inject into and I won't like it. If I write code that's using finite type, I'll be like, I know I'll have to change this at some stage. I won't like it. So what's the middle ground? I find something that does the features of finite type without 7 interfaces. And so I find that if you lean into your own gut instinct of what makes you feel ugh when you look at code, you tend to land on something that is neither over-engineered nor too simple.
So on that, there's the big problem of, and I'll let you speak to this, when you're developing code and you're learning new things and new techniques and stuff, a lot of the time what's fun to work with and fun to like make and do while you're learning it is very different from what's fun to be productive with. So it can be like, I'm 100% guilty of this in the past, where like I've had a thing to do, the thing was relatively simple, I probably could have done it in an hour, and it took me a week instead because I wanted to make this whole cool system. I can think of one very specifically where I way overcomplicated a simple service that just needed to read from a database and built up a whole distributed actor system for it and a bunch of other stuff because, like, hey, this is cool. And in the future, we could scale this out to do all these other things that it never ended up doing and never came close and ended up just ripping it out. So,
I still do that. Like,
yeah, like, what are your thoughts on that though? Like the problem with like focusing on the right amount of code, right? Because I mean, when we're writing it, sometimes it's just for fun, like to learn and experiment. But when we're trying to do like the productive-y stuff,
I just think it should be aware of your context. Like I think it's the problem for me is if it's about learning, write as much silly code as you like. For example, I was learning about IDs. I was telling you recently, I was like, what are the different ways to generate IDs? Because people use GUIDs, but there's also KLIDs and ULIDs, and there's a whole load of other variants that people aren't particularly familiar with, which are things like temporal consistency, or ones that have short codes, or ones that can be decoded back in the date times. And I was like, I've never really played with the entire sea of complicated ways of doing new replacements to GUIDs. And so, just like you, I built a super complicated system which has a cool custom property drawer where you can have a little drop down and pick one of 30 different ways to generate IDs with things like Sony Flake and random stuff you've never heard of, and then press the button to do a spin and regenerate codes, and it has a nice property drawer and all that. I'll never use it because I didn't make it for me to use. I made it for me to learn. I wanted to like, what would this maximally be? And then when I was done, I picked the 3 I liked. I made static functions that call one line and do the thing. And then I put it in a different folder called utilities. And that one is the one I'll ever go to if I need to use it again. And if I ever want to build a system around it, I'll just grab a few utilities and wrap something in it. So I'll often build the maximal thing for learning. I have another thing. It's similar for there's something called perceptual hashes I did recently, where a hash is an indication of what something is. Like the totality of it hashed is a certain shape. But perceptual hashes are like partial hashes, where you say, can you get a relationship between two things? And so a good example of this is images. You can make a p hash and a hash and a bunch of others, and then you'll get a value score if you do comparisons with them with like Harman matching, and you end up getting like this is 70% like this, which is really good for like, is this a duplicate image, etc. Now, again, my point is I built a whole bunch of these for testing stuff. Like, is this text file similar to this text file? Like, did I accidentally rewrite the same state system but like forget a few lines? Then I wanted to make a tool for myself. But again, the systems are overcomplicated. I won't use them. So my point is, I agree with you, but I think it's purely down to context. Is in reality, every line of code in production is a problem. It is a landmine that may get blown up. And so the truth is, the best code you can write is no code at all. If you can solve the problem with the least amount of code possible, that is always the best answer. The least, it's the same with engineering. People say the best engineered system is the one with the least moving parts. It's the one that is the least likely to break. So the fact is, when I write for myself and for fun, I go ham. When I write for production, I try to make it work in the least way possible. So it's context. It's always context.
I think that makes sense. And I think the hard part, though, is just getting everybody else to do that too. Making sure that everybody that you're working with is doing that. Because, like I said, I've been guilty of it. I'm not the only one. Like, I don't think I've ever met a developer who hasn't done it in a production project. I probably have met one or two, but probably not many.
I think the outside of the gaming world, the only other thought I have on that is going too far the other direction. In my opinion, of going with just exactly what you need and therefore coding yourself into a corner where it now becomes a fairly big refactor to get just a small little extra feature that was perhaps in the past talked about. Like, you can imagine building any sort of system or platform or project or whatever, and then somebody saying, oh, well, we might want to do this in the future, but we don't want to do that now. And so we're not going to spend the time. Of course not, right? You don't want to waste your time and your resources building something. So you build the MVP or the version that doesn't include that. And then later you're like, oh, we want to do that now. And it's like, ooh, well, now it's going to be a little extra work to go back. And so,
yeah, but I think personally, that's the price of education. Like if you've only ever been taught how to use an axe, then the axe is the right tool to chop down a tree. You may not have heard of a chainsaw yet, but like you do the best you can with the knowledge you have. If you try to preempt, surely there's something out there, and you try to build an organized system around it, you'll make a mess out of it. And so the fact is, as you get better at what you're doing, you'll learn more tools, and your opinion of what basic is will change. And so I think that's perfectly fine. And so I no longer see that as an impediment, because I see that if I used to freak out and go, this isn't the best way possible, I'm sure someone has a better solution. And that used to annoy me, that I wouldn't even try writing until I had the right answer. And then I'd end up either writing nothing or writing a mess because I'd be using the wrong tools for the wrong job. Now I'm like, I am confident up to this point, and I will use all of the tools I'm confident with to build the best thing I know how to do. And then later on, when I'm more confident, I will pepper in more tools. And that's, again, how I've changed. So over time, like, more stuff falls in, but I try not to ever feel like, if I'm using a tool and I feel shaky on it, I'll just stop using it. I'm like, I don't feel confident that this is right. Something feels off to me, and I don't know why. And again, that's why, to me, the number one barometer over everything else is your ick factor. Like, if this feels either exhausting or fun or whatever, and you may not know why yet, but if you just know that it doesn't feel right, then pivot, do something else.
So your code is bad and it's time to redo it.
I think the example story, you've actually given the example in the past when you're doing client work and you hear them say, we want this, 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 and then in your head you're like, they want those things, and then they're going to ask for this other thing later, so let me just make sure I do this in a way that makes it easy later to change some things, rather than doing exactly what they say, which might
just coding for refactorability.
There you go. There you go.
Instead of pre-planning exactly.
Yeah. So it's also I just want to. It's also saying like it's also understanding what that is, because I think the biggest mistake is that, like, the example I gave earlier with IDs, the portion of that is going to change is the ID generator. I have a thing, I say generate ID, I get ID. The algorithm is the part that changes. So understanding that portion means I can write a robust static implementation of each of these things that completely stands alone by itself, fully functional, no mess, no fuss, no extra features, no extra interfaces. Then I can say, here's my magical ID switcher, and it will use the static, well-structured single pieces, combine them together into a magical, all dancing and singing interface system, and I can use that when I want that. So I think the part that people miss is it makes it sound like, oh, you either have to have simple or overcomplicated. No, I just make a single, like, for example, I have a single utility class for input that does mouse input stuff, and it wraps the extremely tedious line of pointer.current.read value thing, get the camera, get the raycast the camera, world position. There's like 5 things you always do every time, and all you really want, and then you have to clamp it between 0 and width and 0 and height to make sure it's within the camera bounds range. And all I want is a number between 0 and max on both sides that is the correct in-camera perspective ratio for the world space camera. And so I just have that as, input.mouse. Now, if I'm doing a fancier raycast system, I would probably want to use non-alloc, nonsense, something, something, something. But in most cases where I just want a mouse thing, I have mouse dot whatever position or something. And so if I did want to build a compound system on top of that, I could use that as a base part of it. I could have a thing which feeds in a starting vector or feeds in a raycast, and I could then continue from that point. So I often build static utility classes that have no mess, no state, and then I will use those as compound pieces in more complicated systems.
Yeah, I've done that before too. I find the biggest problem I run into with those is that as soon as you're in a project with a bunch of people, everybody's doing things differently and nobody's using your like static setup.
But I take that for granted though. Like I learned that lesson with extension methods. Like I love extension methods, but I use them less and less with more client projects because it becomes this like dot magic happens and people don't really understand it. And so I find utility classes are more conducive to that, because it means if I'm constantly throughout my code base using my system.do thing, even through osmosis, as people read through the code, they'll know there's a thing called my system and they'll use it. It's why when people use Unity for the first time and they're not familiar with it, there's a lot of unknowns. But back in the day of .rigidbody.audio, you're like, what's even on this? I don't know what's there. Yeah. But if you have to write audio listener dot, or you have to write, input dot or time dot, you will eventually, through osmosis and seeing it enough times, get a sense of that there's vaguely these features and concepts.
The change to make everything a Git component. So you had to make the actual Git component call, removing it, made it so it was obvious that all of those things like your rigid body and your character controller or your sprite renderer, they're all just components that are on there. They're not
so that's what I do now, basically. I make static managers that I promote through the code base to show people, but secretly the static manager uses an interface internally to handle its own magic and swapping stuff out when I need to do the magic. In fact, that's what Unity does for the logger. If you write debug.log, it's using its own iLogger to log via debug.log, which you can override or change or whatever. So the naive approach is just use debug.log everywhere, which you shouldn't use statics, blah, blah, blah. But even if you did, there's still a way to hook into that and swap it out later because the architecture is in place to do that. So I give people a hook of like, line generator dot. Line generator dot will always generate lines of various form factors in different ways. And if I decide later on to modify how that algorithm works, I'll have a place to swap an interface internally to do something that's got nothing to do with people using it. I would still prefer to use the native interfaces directly and not this magic helper handler thing. But when I work with people, I give them a thing they can see the name of and they can sort of intuit over time. There is a game.messages, game state.goto. There's these things that are very declarative in what they're doing.
That seems like a good idea. And actually kind of forcing me to think like extension methods. It's a big issue with them, right? Because people don't realize the magic. Yeah. And I've actually run into an issue recently where extension methods from a package that was an editor tool, so like editor only extension methods, was used in something, so then it worked fine, but doesn't compile.
One of the best ones is I've noticed like 6 different assets I've used in the past all have their own internal with alpha, because it's so bloody common to take a color and do with alpha that it's so funny that I'll write with alpha and go, wait, I'm not using my with alpha, I'm using someone else's with alpha. And it's just, it's silly.
That is hilarious. So there are a couple other things I want to jump onto. There was a question about diagramming. I want to ask that in a second, but first I put a poll up in YouTube to just see the default Sprite import.
There's only
mode.
one right answer.
Discussion about this, and I think you might have seen that story in that Unity chat about what the default Sprite import mode should be. Should it be single, multiple? And this is when you drag a sprite into Unity and then it pops up in the inspector. Right now, as of whatever it is, 2022, it defaults to a multiple mode for a sprite sheet that has the editor. It does
I
that
have lost
even if you
hours
don't
of
have
my
the
life
Sprite
to
pack
this.
installed. Even if the Sprite pack's not there and you can't edit it, it does that. And I never use sprite sheets anymore because everything just gets packed. So we had a little discussion about it, and apparently there was requests, it sounded like, at the time, from people using lots of sprite sheets. But I'm just curious what the audience uses. Do you use lots of singles? Like, I generally pull in a single image. I'd like that to be a sprite. I like it to go, if it's a PNG, I like to just go straight into sprite mode if the other ones in the folder are sprites. Like, if the other ones are textures, go to that one. Just go to whatever the things in that folder are. But yeah, so it looks like 11% said multiple, 60% single, and 30 don't know. What do you guys think?
When I voted, there were
Single.
0 said multiple. When I voted, like,
Yeah, when I saw there was a lot of 0 for a while.
Yeah. When you called out the
Yeah.
poll, people were like, I gotta vote. Gotta vote.
Yeah, it's infuriating because they have their own, again, sprite atlasing system. And the way it works, this is what drives me absolutely mental. You import your sprites and they come in as multiples, even if they're singles, fine, whatever. Then you use their sprite atlas system. Cool. Then you drag the sprites you want into the sprite atlas and sets it up. Then you click apply and nothing happens and you get no errors. And you're like, what? Why is there simultaneously no errors and nothing's happening? Why? Because the Sprite Atlas expects single sprites. And so, even though they import them as multiple, and then they expect you to have them as single when using them in their sprite system, it doesn't work. And I wouldn't mind if it says, warning, these ones are multiple. Would you like it to be single? But it doesn't. So for ages, I was like, there's nothing working. I don't understand. And the fact that in order to fix the Sprite Atlas not working, you have to not look at the Sprite Atlas. You have to go back to the individual sprites, change its import settings to make it work with this other thing is infuriating. So yeah, I've literally lost hours going, I don't understand why this is not working.
I just lose a couple of clicks every time. I'm like, oh yeah, I can't find it. Go click. But I was just curious. It seems like it's heavily skewed towards what I thought, but not 100% like I was hoping.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there are a couple other things. So I do want to talk about this singletons one, but really quickly, there was a question up above that I had an answer to. If I can find it, where was it? It was about using UML to diagram stuff. They're wondering if you do any like whiteboard or paper diagramming or anything of classes in architecture. And I actually have a notebook over there where I occasionally do, but I found that I do it less and less because every time I write it out on paper, it ends up being wrong. Sometimes I do it for like a big, super high level system, get an idea of what I want it to do. But then as soon as I go into code, I'm like, oh yeah, that I mix things up. And maybe I'm just terrible at UML diagramming. Maybe that's the problem. I'm just bad at it. But I've always run into that problem. What about you? Either one of you guys diagram out your code or your systems?
I've done that, not UML because I wouldn't know what to do.
Or a similar drawing boxes and lines.
Yeah, I've done that in the past. Not anytime recent. I think the last time was probably years ago at this point. But to your point, the same thing. I find that I will make a mistake, and then once I get down to it, I'm like, oh no, something different. But it does help me, especially if I'm out like somewhere right now on my computer or something. I just want to think about it. That does help me think about things. So there's value, but it's not necessarily the exact, output of that exercise.
Yeah, I just think the fidelity is wrong. It's two problems tied into one. One of them is, do I understand the problem? And the other is, what code should I write to solve the problem? And I think UML tries to like noodle two different individual, completely unrelated problems together. So I don't use UML. I will sometimes open Obsidian and use Excalidraw, or I use MarkMind or something, and I will often brainstorm out the user stories, like what am I trying to do? Or if I click this, this should happen. Or I want this to happen when this state occurs. Or if I go to this state, do this thing instead. And I'll use it to reason out the like flow of things. But I won't presume to know the right fields or values or methods, because that's entirely going to come out in the design. So yeah, I'll trial out the ideas, and then I'll write the simplest code that tries to make that work over time and sort of build up the architecture.
Sorry, I muted myself there. Let's go on to this singletons and event system stuff now. I think it'd be fun. Enko said, please rant about singletons. So I think it'll be fun. In that video, one of the things that I was talking about a decent amount, I don't know if I went enough into detail about it though, was event buses and even like service locator patterns and message queues for games. I found that in enterprise, an event bus is pretty much critical for any big scaling system, or message queue. So, something like that is almost always needed for big scaling systems. Not always, but most of the time. In a game, I found that on the client side, it has always been an overcomplication. There are probably maybe 1 to 5% of games where I can make an argument that it makes sense. But I think that in the majority of them, what I found is that people implement event buses or message queues for their game. The game is single threaded. It's a single process. The message queue is really just a delegate to call back to another thing. 90% of the time that delegate is called immediately. It's exactly the same as an event with just a bunch of layers on top of it, a new struct added in there, and a new data type for the delegate basically. It usually could just be a single parameter or an action type, or no parameters at all. And it makes the debugging experience more painful, and it solves no actual problem. Like the problem that it's there to solve of, I want to push this thing off so another process can handle it and do it on its own at its own time or whatever, is not how it's used. And it doesn't actually happen that way. A lot of time they're just waiting for the message to be processed, right? A lot of the buses I've seen are like that. It says it's a message bus, but it's really waiting and just firing off a bunch of delegates. Same with service locators. They end up just being like a single place that has a bunch of singletons. Those singletons never change. They don't get swapped out. You're not going to, this vendor uses this set of libraries and these ones, and this client is using these ones. It's always the same ones, and all of the benefits that you'd get from separating that stuff out when you're like, we've got, like, for instance, Chris has hundreds of different sprinklers. They need to be able to send out messages and have them be received and handled differently. In a game, it's always going to the same place. It's never going to a different thing. Unless maybe you've got some test automation in there, in which case we're not talking about that. You're in a totally different scenario, and message queues still probably aren't the solution there. But yeah, anyway, long, boring rant. Thoughts?
I really struggle with this topic, because I try to use the right terms. I learn what each thing is for, its name, its use, and I find that oftentimes a lot of people conflate all of them together. Like each and every one of those. A message queue is not a message bus, is not a message locator. It's not, the service locators are separate from mediators. Each one of these is a different thing. And so you end up with a very complicated set of like interconnection.
I guess the point was all of them though. Like none of them in any of those scenarios make sense in games from what I've seen. Like I said,
that I'd fundamentally disagree
edge case scenarios where things are very dynamically loading and changing out. You're building a Roblox, something similar where shit is very dynamic, but the majority of stuff, the game is the game and it's not changing, and all of that stuff adds complexity for no benefit other than to say like, oh, I pushed this thing off so somebody else can deal with it. Fuck you, go deal with it yourself and go fix it. It's not a huge distributed thing where like, you're you're building this one thing and passing it off to somebody else. That's more in like a server client infrastructure setup, not in the in-game process, right? Like, I guess that's my point. Like, I didn't mean fuck you to you. I meant to the.
No, I know. But my counterpoint, I guess, would be to say everything you do on your computer is a message bus. Every time you click your mouse, every time you copy to your clipboard, that's what's happening. There is a messaging system. And if you've ever written a Windows application, you have to listen to that, Win32 proc system to subscribe to that event to capture all of those individual pieces.
Yeah, you got to pull it. You got to create that loop first.
Mm-hmm. So this goes back to like, I don't like absolutes of saying this is too complicated, this isn't, because like it's like trying to say a fork is too complicated to eat food with. It's like that doesn't mean anything. It's like, what are you eating? Do you need a fork? They're not. There's no question of complexity. There is, what is the problem? Does that tool solve the problem? If it does, use the tool to solve the problem. And this whole idea.
I guess the point here is it's like you using chopsticks to eat everything.
Yeah, but again, that's not a question.
Maybe
of
if you're really good with chopsticks, but majority of people aren't. So.
Yeah, but again, that's not a question of the quality of a tool. It is the quality of people's understanding of the tool. So, like, I think let's do a like Socratic little breakdown, because I think it's worth going over these steps, right? So, at a very basic level, what is a message, right? A message is you sending information to somebody to say, hey, there's some stuff. Here's
something happened, or do something.
Yeah. What is the expectation there? Nothing. You can shout messages into the sky. It doesn't mean anything. There's no expectation for anything of any kind to happen. So the first question, is it over-engineering to use messages? No, because nothing's expected to happen. There's no, right now, at this stage of the problem, you could have everything send messages, and there's nothing wrong with that because it doesn't do anything. It's a perfectly inert thing. That's what. So the question is, if it's perfectly inert, why would you have messages? Well, the next bit is, what is a message bus? A message bus is an implication that a system is going to have a stream of information that you may or may not want to subscribe to. Now, in a game, is there ever streams of information you want to subscribe to? Like, I don't know, knowing when enough characters are killed to switch to the next level, or knowing when you've done enough steps to fire an achievement. Yes, that is the thing that frequently occurs in games. Is there cases you would want to use a message bus? Yes.
But what's the benefit? I guess the point of the benefit of the dynamic subscribing, being able to subscribe versus just firing off an event that you're subscribed to, where the whole message, the system on top of that, beyond just using an event, where's the benefit there?
Notice how you're making it complicated.
No,
that's what I'm saying. It's like you're making it complicated. What I'm saying is, game does things. Some things are important to listen to. I don't know what those are going to be. So if I have a game and I have a thing called messages, and I just send out to it, oh, someone died. Oh, you collected a coin. And I do nothing with that information. There's nothing overcomplicated about doing that, is there? I'm literally just saying.
Well, that's like firing off an event that's totally unregistered for, right? Like right. You should just delete it. Right? It shouldn't be in there. If you've got no references to it, it's there. You should end up deleting it. It shouldn't be sitting there. If you have it in there as a message bus system, it's not going to be gray. You're going to see an event firing off, and you're not going to know that it's not registered, not doing anything, and not used.
See, and again, this is why I think this is a vitally important distinction. This is a good point we stopped at.
Well, I mean, the point, I guess my argument is not so much that you shouldn't be sending messages. It's the way that you're sending messages. Yeah, doing it with events, good. Doing it with queues.
No, again, I agree with you, but I want to be like really slowly stepping. I think this is a very vital point. Is I agree with you, but we're talking about different things. You are talking about directly responding to things which are like first party. So I would consider, to use a phrase, tight connections and weak connections.
But event buses just hide tight connections.
No, but again, we haven't gotten to that point yet. I'm saying that we're getting really slowly. So I want to prove a very important point here. We can establish messages aren't complicated. They're just a piece of information. A message queue, in concept at least, isn't complicated. It is a lot of messages in a stream that you can look up. It's when you wait at the bus and go, oh, the bus has been rescheduled. It's a thing you could look at, you may not look at. You don't care who listens to it, who doesn't. Now, the next bit, which you're describing, is when you have a tight coupling between two systems, where when this happens, switch to next level. What you're describing there is game logic. That is not anything to do with events, anything to do with message buses. You're describing a logical thing, which is there is a rule in my game, which is when X occurs, Y should happen. When when all enemies in the level have died, move to next screen or whatever. Right? That's a rule or a
Or
system.
when I pick up a coin, update this coin UI.
Yeah.
Show a particle effect. Yeah.
And my argument is you're entirely right, 1000%, to say you should not obfuscate and hide business rules in intrinsic relationships between systems, which is to say that if you do use a message bus to answer that question, in other words, when this happens, switch to next level, it's never written in the code to say you should go to another level when all enemies died. And I 100% agree with you, because that's not a question of message buses or events or anything. That is actually a different problem. It is an architectural problem where you have taken a core rule, a systemic part of the actual intrinsic part of your game. When this happens, this occurs, and it isn't in your code. It is in an impassable, vague concept tied roughly to things. So going back to my point, the thing you are railing against, correctly, has nothing to do with either events or with messages. What you're saying is people should not design in such a way where important logic is hidden between abstracted systems of events. And that's true, but that's got nothing to do with the value or quality of either an event system or a message bus.
I still don't see where is the scenario where the things are not tightly coupled, where I'm sending off messages and for some reason I don't care that they're not received, or that they're not handled, or that the handling of them is somehow benefiting from this message bus.
Achievement systems, logging systems, adding additional features to like modify colors later that you want to add, like a fun theming thing. Anything which is not intrinsically core logic to the game.
No, I'm not getting it. So a logging system, sure, but that I don't consider that as like a core to the thing. That should be a separate thing that's got its own bus handling it probably in there, and I'm just pushing off.
Let me put it another way: is that
or like a network message system. If I want to send off a message, obviously it should kick off to another thread in queue, but I don't need to send them. But what I'm trying to figure out is these inter-game connection areas, here's an example: play sound effects, fire and forget. But when am I ever in a scenario where I want to, where like a message bus helps me with that versus just subscribing to the thing that should play sound effects, right? And where's the bus complexity in there adding to it? Because all I've ever seen is that it makes it drastically harder to debug because your call stack gets fucked up. You have sometimes even a frame delay in between, and the coupling gets hidden because now instead of like registering for a thing from the thing, you can register from anywhere, and the worst part is that you can fire stuff off from anywhere. So with event systems, typically the event is fired off from the thing that's handling it and from the thing that's dealing with the system. Like if it's an item manager, the item manager has events, and when items change, it's updating. And it's firing that off. But with a message bus system, what I found is most of the time, anything can fire off any message, which means that anything could say that my inventory updated, whether it updated or not. And it gets a lot more just, I guess, confusing because the triggers for things are not necessarily related to the things that are firing that stuff off or causing it to happen. Sometimes I'm struggling, really struggling to see a benefit, because I've seen the benefit, like when you have multiple systems that are dynamically loaded, right? And like, okay, this version loads up these DLLs, this version loads up these DLLs, or maybe even on like different consoles, some light benefit. But I struggle with it in games. Sorry to ramble.
No, it's interesting. It's different perspectives. I just think it's a fundamental misunderstanding about what an event is versus what an event bus is versus, like, that's why I'm trying to go through this separately and slowly, because I think what people miss is, like, I don't think this is as subjective as people think. I think these things have purposes that are very specific and targeted. And if you understand the purpose, you can use the right tool. Like, to me, it's not a question of event versus event bus, because they're not the same tool. They do completely different things for completely different purposes. So, like,
totally.
When you talk about a class, the idea is I have a thing, and a thing has behavior, so it has methods. I have a thing, and I have another thing, and they want to communicate with each other. Well, somehow they have to communicate. In an ideal world, you would have a parent above it. So I have a ball, I have a dog, and I want the dog to, like, go chase the ball. Well, I would have something called a world, and a world has a dog, and it has a ball, and then dog.chase ball, right? That's a conceptual thing. But now we're getting to, yeah, but that's not always the case. Sometimes you want events, which means you want to subscribe to something, but you want to not have a direct correlation between where it's fired. So what is an event? An event is an announcement of a thing that there is something interesting that possibly happened. So the next step would be to say, rather than having one to the other, you might have a system like receive mail. Receive mail fires an event, and then whenever mail is received, it fires an event. And it's a single degree of separation. So the point here is to say that like each one of these things is a separation step that moves you in a different direction. An example is like when you jump to message bus, I know
on the mail, like what's the benefit of getting that as a message through a message bus system or queue versus just having a mail system dot on mail received and registering for that? Where do you see the benefit? Yes.
Well, so again, it's hard to give an answer.
And I mean, this is the because I do agree, messaging super important. It's just the overcomplicating of messaging that I am really struggling with.
Yeah, but that to me is like that's an example of an overcomplication. On message received is an overcomplication to me because that's not so. A system doesn't need that.
What do you mean? How is that more complicated than a new message type for message received that one thing has to fire off for and the other one has to register? Like, it's literally just a little bit less, more code.
What's an event?
Event is just a delegate to call something back when something happens.
Right. And how is that stored? And how is that systemically stored? It is a list of pointers to delegates. Yeah. So you're saying you shouldn't use a list to use a thing because
I'm saying you shouldn't write another system on top of the list of pointers that already exists to abstract away the fact that that already exists and make it so that you can call the event from anywhere. You could just make an action that you could call from anywhere and it would give you the same functionality, but it loses the locking of that event call from the thing that's actually being modified. It can now be called from anywhere and it loses the code. I don't know the right word for it, but just being able to see the references in code immediately, see things are not used and know where something's coming from. If I know that I'm messaging for or registering for the message or mail system dot on message received, I know that the message is coming from the mail system and that it's all related to that. I know that other things aren't firing it off. It's not coming from some other thing. And I think it might be even better for like an inventory system, right? Like if it's inventory system dot on inventory added versus just an on item added that gets called from anywhere. Because then the on item added, anything could be triggering that, but it really should be your inventory system. There shouldn't be anything else that's actually triggering that. But now if you've abstracted that into a message, you can call it from anywhere. You can use this message. It should be an event for when an item gets added, and it doesn't necessarily have to be called at that time, right? So, and it doesn't add anything to it. There's just I'm still struggling to see the benefit of this extra layer. I think it's just it's like, what is the benefit of this layer unless there's some edge?
It's not like they're not extra layers. They're different.
It is a layer though. It's literally. How is it other?
Okay, look. Let me try. I have to try to pull this back because there's I know what you're saying. What you're missing. There's a fundamental misunderstanding here. Like your broad statement is to say that a message bus is a complicated thing when you could just use an event. But the thing is, I agree.
If you don't have multiple processes reading.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that statement doesn't make sense for multiple reasons because it's a different. Like I'm trying to get you to a different point. So let's just step back a bit. I want to do a thing. Forget about queues, forget about messages, forget about all that stuff. We're gonna do something. I want to move to a different step here. I want to say we have a class. Classes do things, right? Like have again dog bark, whatever else. Yeah. Again, I understand what that statement is, but it's not what you think it is as a statement, right? I've used this example before, where I said it's someone saying, "Can you tell me the correct way to eat soup with a fork?" Like that statement. You're like, just give me the answer. I don't need a more complicated thing. But if I'm trying to tell you that the question itself inherently has a flaw in the way it's
no way
to
eat before.
Exactly, because it's the wrong question. So I'm trying to tell you that
my
the
wife
question
all the
itself
time.
is incorrect.
It's like, you can't eat pasta with a spoon.
So like, what is okay? I don't know how far to go back here, but like, there's data. Data is just numbers and facts and things, right? Then a data structure is you stack a bunch of them together. So you end up with data that's like a name and an age. That is a now data structure, or a record is another way it's phrased. It's like a recorded piece of information. What's the difference? Well, a single data is a unit, it's a single thing. A record or a data structure is anything that could be serialized and deserialized back into a chunk that is its entire state can be encapsulated and returned. If you cannot do that, it is no longer a data structure. If it has a method is behavior, you cannot serialize and reconstruct behavior. You can't do that. The systems might implement behavior the same, but the act of the behavior itself cannot be serialized. So therefore, it is no longer data structure. It is now an object, right? So then objects have two types of behaviors. There's getters and setters, or mutators and accessors, which is, why do you have them? When you have an object, you've got things that can retrieve information from the system and things which set it or access it. Another way to phrase it is what's called command query separation. So to kind of simplify again, there are things, dog, cat, chicken, whatever, and it has methods on it. Some methods are getters, some methods are setters. Now, if you want to interact with this thing, you have to decide how you want to do it. You can either ask it questions, which are called queries. You're basically saying, how many legs do you have? What color is your fur? And then there's things you want to set. You can set or do commands, which is perform a jump, eat this food, right? So there are objects. Objects have commands and objects have queries, right? And so when people talking about an event is the next layer on top of that, where it is the relationship between commands and queries. Because if I say to somebody, jump, I have no way of getting information back about what they did. And there's multiple different strategies to solve this problem. So let's go back to mail. Mail is probably a good one. If I had a system called Mailbox and I said send letter, I have no way of knowing if that message got sent. Now, let's look at all the ways we can solve that problem. That's what I'm getting to. We're going to solve the problem of it. The first one is it happens instantly. And so you have a return value. Send message or send mail, receive object back saying, did it send? That's the simplest version. But that's not real life because stuff tends not to be synchronous. There tends to be some asynchronous nature to it. Step two is how would we do it alternatively? We need some way for that system to let me know. Now, one method is a global event, which is anytime any message is received, or to send a message to say message was received correctly. That's one.
Wait, hold on a second, because this is switching very different from like where we're at. So with your send mail, if that is going off, that's kicking off an asynchronous process that's unrelated. It's very much similar to a certain network client server setup. I'm thinking much more in this is all happening in the client. Right, like I did a thing, and then something else is happening that isn't waiting on an external service or an external process. It's all in process, and the thing should happen right away. Right, like that's the 90% of the cases I see. It's not and the issue that I have isn't with people sending off a message and then getting something back. It's with them sending a message to their own internal object, expecting it to do something that frame, and then expecting it maybe even to respond and do something still in the game that frame, maybe even send a message back for no reason. If they're sending it off to like a network request, totally makes sense. Sending it off to a log thing that's writing to a disk makes sense. But when they're doing it for like, I clicked this button and now instead of just doing the thing I want it to do, it's going to send a message, and then other systems can arbitrarily listen to it. But if they're not listening to it, my game doesn't work, and those systems never change. Like
this is you're conflating
the scenario that I see all the time.
Okay, let me, because again you're missing what I'm trying to say here. Okay, forget about mail because you're assuming I'm saying networking. If I have an AI, a dog, and I say walk over here, go to that position, is that a linear sequence? Yes or no? As in, like, can I say walk did arrive? No, because I don't know if it's arrived yet.
Right.
So it is an asynchronous operation already, without networks, without clients, without anything.
Right. And that's the kind that I'd like to focus. I feel like the other ones, it's too easy to abstract it away. Right. The benefit is obvious when you have a network message. If you're just moving an object and you want to tell it to start moving to a point, what is the benefit of doing that with a message versus an event?
We haven't gotten there. What I'm saying is you need to look at the problem, step up while you're doing it.
Right. I just want to make sure we're on the right problem though, because if we go to like these more enterprisey problems, then it suddenly makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, but I haven't mentioned any of that. You're the one who mentioned network. Like I'm saying, let's say again, dog walk to position. Forget about everything to do with networking. We're not talking about networking.
Yeah, let's go. Dog walks to position. That's
yes.
good.
I'm trying to demonstrate that this is a philosophical thing. It's got nothing to do with any of the complexities of system integration. It is a problem where it says there is an entity and I want to talk to it. I can say, where are you? That is a GET request. Do I have to wait to do that? Maybe or maybe not. Let's start with just GET. Before we get to setting, I want to just highlight the GET thing. So this is the idea of command versus query. Query is, there is dog, where are you? Now, the dog might just say, here I am. And that can be a return value on a method. Very simple, right? But maybe it's doing some calculation from the North Star and figure out some stuff. I don't know. I don't know what it's doing. Maybe it is, right? How do we solve that problem?
That's not the problem that's ever solved. The problem, that is never the problem that is solved, that they're going to do something hard on another thread. They're waiting for it to finish walking there and then triggering something when it gets there.
You're fighting invisible demons here. You're saying sometimes maybe it's not. I'm saying right now, I'm talking to you. We're having a
right, but you're coming up with a hypothetical that doesn't exist to justify it, right? Like if the dog has to do some crazy off-thread thing, that's the same as making a server call and having to wait. But everything that we're doing, and
you're making presumptions. I'm not. All I'm saying is, in a black box, I have a question of this thing. Where are you? And
yes, that should be instant. And if it's not instant, there's a serious issue.
But yeah, best thing is you're describing a different thing. I'm saying step one, I have an object and I have me, and I'm asking a question of this thing.
You get too abstract.
No, it's not abstract. It's the same thing. I said, there is dog, and I say, where are you? Now, what I'm demonstrating here is that all things being equal, you are right. In a simple system, it should return immediately. But what I'm saying is, forget about...
In a game, it should return immediately.
That's irrelevant to the question. I'm saying, if there is a thing, and I'm asking a question, I don't control when I get my response back. That's just the one fact of life. That's a statement. It's a factual. I do not know when I get my response back from this thing. But maybe it is single-threaded, but it freezes the thread. I don't know. Maybe the hard drive skips for a second. I forget about the why, forget about the complexity. I'm just saying.
Now we're back on, or we're off of the dog, right?
We're not, because I haven't gotten to where I'm trying to explain to.
There's no way that the dog, you don't, like, what is the hypothetical thing that you have to get the position from, to get where you're from, that it takes time and isn't instant, and that you're willing to, and it's okay to wait for?
This is like you talked about the idea of the implementation versus like it doesn't matter. My point is, I don't care what it does. You're baking in the assumption of going, oh, it's a vector. I'm saying forget about any details. I'm just saying broadly, there is thing, I ask it question, and I cannot control. It should be, all things being equal, return me the result. That is statement. It should do that, but I don't know if it will. So we're just dealing with the philosophical reality of there is a thing, I have a question, I don't know the answer yet. So that's one, right? In a very simple example, you're right. It's a vector. It'll return the vector. Done. Right? That's a simple.
Well, in any game that's not multi-threaded or multiplayer and online, it should be.
Forget about networks. Forget about multiplayer. I'm just saying, in anything, in real life, I ask a person a question. They either going to respond to me immediately, or they might think about it for a bit and then give me a response later. Unrelated to everything. Like, I don't know if I'm going to get a response back immediately. Yes or no? Is that a factual statement?
Sure.
Yeah,
I feel like I'm doing the same thing I do to my son, where he gets very angry because he gives me these hypotheticals that are very different from
they're not different. Like it's about how you think about a problem. It's got nothing to do with implementation. Right. You keep bringing in. So anytime you're going to say, we're not talking about implementation. We're talking about how a thing works. I'm just saying to think through, as in when you deal with anything, you're either asking it questions or you're asking it to do something. That is a statement of fact. Statement two is when you ask it a question, you might get an answer back immediately, or you might not. If you get an answer back immediately, good, we can use a return value. If you don't, there's multiple ways to deal with this new problem. The new problem of not a result back immediately, how do we solve it? One solution is like, say, what restaurants do. How do you do a response back? Well, you might have a notice board saying your order's up. That is like an event. It is like saying, I have made an order at a desk. I have gone and sat down. There's an event I subscribe to saying, look at board. When board ready, let me know my order. That's one way of solving that problem. That is an event-based approach. The second way is by using a future. What is a future? A future is where you hand someone something back immediately. So I can say, hey, can I have my order? And they still hand you something immediately. But what they hand you is a ticket or a flashing light or something. Then that thing will beep or change later to inform you about the state of the information. So my point is, unrelated to everything else, these are separate problems. So one is, I want to ask questions and I want to get a response back. In other words, I want to ask it to do something and I want to know if it succeeded or not. And what I'm saying is, all the other questions downstream, whether we're talking about events, buses, queues, networks, any of that stuff, it all stems on your understanding of this principle, that it's always, I am either asking a question or I'm asking someone to do something, and I'm waiting for a response back. And what I'm saying is, if you understand the problem, you can pick the right solution. Step one is, if it is a very simple one-to-one thing, you can use a return value. If it is more complicated, but you need a response about that thing. So if I send a message and I want a message back from my thing, like, again, if I send a letter, I don't want to subscribe to an on mail received event because I don't want to know when everybody received mail. I want to know when my message was sent. So getting a response back in the form of a packet that says, this is your thing, subscribe to this, and when that's ready, you'll get a message back, is a better approach than an on mail sent thing. Because on mail sent is saying, I send a message and I'm waiting for anything back. So my point is, even saying the simple
if I sent
answer,
a message, I probably just want to show a little thing that says I sent the message and I'm done. And I wouldn't get that on somebody else sending a message because it's a video game, not a server. So there's aren't other players there.
if there is a system and I send information in and I'm waiting to get a response back, it's got there's nothing to do with networks, nothing to do with servers. What I'm saying is, you're either responding to your message or you're responding to a message, and they're different things.
Right. I still struggle with it. I don't know. Dave says he uses event buses, and hey, it looks like 44% of people are wrong in chat too. So
okay. I voted, and I am the I don't know category. I'll tell you what. I'll be the arbiter of truth here. Sounds like Stories is more flexible, and it sounds like perhaps Wyman's more straightforward. But I don't know anything, so I say go with whatever works for your project, and then refactor it later.
Well, I think to be fair, like, it doesn't make a huge, like, there's not a huge drawback to using them. The biggest issue that I really run into is that debugging becomes more painful. It just becomes more of a pain in the ass. End up with messages that are fired off and never listened to, and you got to add in extra checking for that. It's kind of a pain, and it feels like a bit of extra complexity. It makes it a little bit more difficult to know where things are necessarily coming from. And there's a tiny bit of performance overhead, but I think it's so small, it's not worth mentioning. Just like most other performance things, like it's assuming that you didn't fuck up your message queue system or your bus, it should be a relatively small overhead.
Well, my thing is to say that, like, none of this is related to each other. Like, all of these things are under, like, the level, the way you would solve the problem of there are people waiting at the bus and I need to let them know that the bus has been delayed is a different problem than I am ordering food and I need to know whether the result happened, or I've sent a letter to my friend in Canada and I need to know when it got back, versus I have to make sure that, you know, the person has gone to school in the room next door, the kid has got to, like, each of these are different problems and they all have completely different solutions. And people think they're talking about singletons as one thing or events as one thing, but there is a spectrum of complicated, various different solutions. There's events are one thing, event buses are another thing, using callback functions is another, using asynchronous awaits is another, using futures is another, using event brokers is another, using mediators is another. And the reason why people are so confused about all this stuff is they keep looking at one thing. They pick up a tool and they'll go, does this work in the thing I'm jamming it into? It does, I'll use it or not. And what I'm trying to get people to think about is none of these things are unique. It's like they keep using the example of using food. It's like, if the problem is eating food and then there's a thing called cutlery, there are different types of cutlery. If you try to ask a very liminal question by saying, how do I eat soup with fork? You're actually missing the entire problem, which is there are categories of food. There are categories of cutlery. Some cutlery work for some food. And if you can step out of the question, which is, do you eat soup with fork or how to eat soup with fork, you can realize there's actually a lot more interconnected systems here. You just have to step back and realize what the job of both of these things are and match the right ones to the right ones. It's not a question of should you use fork to eat soup. The question itself is wrong, because what you should be saying is, what is a utility? What are these different utensils? What is a utensil good at? What is it good at? What is it bad at? This scoops stuff, this doesn't. This pierces stuff, this doesn't. Does this food need piercing or scooping? And you pick the appropriate thing for the appropriate job. And so making a statement like, I use events or I use event queues, to me is a nonsense point, because it's like saying, oh, when I eat food, I eat forks. I like, personally, I know some people say spoons are complicated, but I go with fork. Like, that's a nonsense statement. It doesn't mean anything, because there are different categories of things and different categories. You apply the right thing to the right thing.
I guess I don't disagree. My whole point really is just that I feel like the message queues and event buses are a very rarely needed to use utensil that gets massively overused when it doesn't need to be. And
and I can agree with that statement.
things. And
but that's not what you said.
Yeah.
You said you should use events, not events. That's a different thing.
For things that actually, where it is actually a command query and I need to send something and there's no way to have the response immediately and I shouldn't expect the response immediately, it makes sense. But in every scenario that's like a real scenario I can think of, that is me sending a network message. It is me communicating with some other hardware or something. It's not something that's actually happening like in game where I need to then wait around and I want to wait for another message to fire back off. I might kick something off and have that thing fire something else off, but I definitely don't want to fire it off and then, yeah.
Okay, well the reason why this is confusing is because this is a complexity thing, where as the problem domain increases in complexity, so does the solutions. So I agree with you that it's usually using the wrong way. Let me give an example of a system.
Even with a complex domain, I feel like it just makes it more complex.
Okay, well, let me show you when I add it. Like, here's a step of things, right? So make a game, I make a class called game start, and it just prints game started, right? Then I decide I want to add the ability to pause my game. Now, I've established there's two states in my game, paused and not paused. So I might use a Boolean and say, is paused, is not paused. I switch between two states. Then I might realize, okay, well, actually, I want to be able to play the game, pause, and then go back to what I was doing, or go to a different thing and then go back. So now we know there's states involved. So you could use maybe a switch statement and do different states, right? And so I now might have a state of enter and exit. And I would have a state that says, starting game is working, then I go into the pause state, and then I back out of the pause state, and I go into a different thing. So now it's like one layer of complexity. And now I want to deal with input into the state system. I want to say, when I press back, whatever back means, if I'm paused, I want to back out into the real game. But if I'm in a menu, I want to back out to the next menu step or whatever. How would I deal with that? Now, I could write, if input pressed back, fine. But that's not what I'm saying. I don't really want to say, when I press the back escape key, do this. What I'm saying is, when a back happens, do whatever back has to do. So what's
the other back?
A back is pressing the escape versus pressing backspace versus pressing B on the controller.
You're calling already an abstract method.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. There is one. Yes, yeah. Right. So what I do is, I add a single method on my states called receive message. I don't know what that means yet. It's just receive message. And the most simple message is, when the message is submit, go forward. When the message is cancel, go back. And that means that when I'm in a screen that is going to select a menu and go to the next, like press start to start game, submit loads the scene to start the game. When I'm in the pause menu and I press press start to go pause, go into the pause menu. If I press submit, it says, do you want to quit? And if I press submit again, it quits the game. If I press back, it backs out to the pause. If I press back again, it goes back to the main thing. So I don't need to get into, you're talking about complexity. I don't pick input systems. I don't pick anything. I'm just saying there is the concept of pause, not pause. There is a concept of submit or cancel. And I can write the entire state loop of pausing the game, unpausing, going into the menu, selecting whether I want to quit or not, deciding I don't want to quit, actually going back and quitting, all with just the statement, message received pause, or message received submit or cancel. So if submit, next, if cancel, back, right? Then, unrelated to that, I can do something else, which might say, the input system can be handled different ways. Now, the reason I'm building this layer up is I might decide later to have a menu, like a pause button on my screen. How could I do that? I could say, if clicked button, go to thing, subscribe to event, send whatever. Or I could say game, send, escape, or back. The same thing, because it's going to perform the same behavior. So what I'm saying is, the simplicity was at the level of saying there is a state. When you're in pause state, cancel goes back, submit offers you to quit. So that's a single.
Is that not extra complexity though on your button now? Because now your pause button has the action of submit, and anybody looking at it is going to go, "What the fuck is this? I don't understand it," and then spend hours digging through the code to try to figure out how that's actually pausing it.
I just want to highlight the example here. So your argument against doing this is a theoretical scenario where a future person might be confused by a thing that might happen in future.
No, my scenario is that you're working with other people, and other people are going to look at the code and not have this intrinsic knowledge of the way that, it feels a lot like coding by convention, where there's like these, you name this thing right and it works, you name it wrong and it doesn't work. And if you don't know that, it's going to be a pain. And it's not that you couldn't learn that, and like with this one specific thing that the pause button does a submit, and a submit means that it goes through this other system and is actually going to pause the system. But it does seem like it's adding some complexity there that to hide the fact that you're just calling that same pause functionality, right? Because that button could just call into your game manager and pause the game too, because that's all it's really doing.
Yeah, but again, you're saying that like that's not complexity. To me, I've said there is a concept of, say, going forward and going back, and when I go forward, then I can go into.
But where are the like when you say there's that concept, it's like, is that the whole game is just menus that you're going back and forward through, or is this just like one part of the game that, like, in this UI thing, and it's just an extra thing to kind of keep in your head?
What I'm saying is it's the same as before when we talked about everything else, like a dog jumping or receiving mail. Is everything is messages. Literally, a method is a message. It is a thing saying, do this or return me this value. And the problem is people have this weird idea that a message in the form of a class or a string is like a different architectural decision than a message in the form of an event or a message in the form of calling a method. They are all solving the problem of the relationship between classes. It's the same problem. And you can call the message a different thing, but they're all messages. Anytime you call a method, you are sending a message from one thing to another thing. And there's the line you're drawing about whether that's a good message or bad message has nothing to do with the problem domain. What I'm saying is, if there is a thing and you can pause or unpause, there is a single tiny finite bit of information there, and you can write a very elegant solution that doesn't mention buttons. And to you said that it's simpler to connect the button. I'm saying it's simpler to say, when I say pause to the current state, if the current state can pause, it pauses. If I say back from the current state and the current state can go back, it will go back. And then unrelated to that simple statement, I could say, if I press a button called pause, it will tell the current state to pause. That is simple.
How does it
that is
know
simple.
to tell
Both
the
are simple.
current state
Nothing
to
complicated.
pause? Is it because it's reading the name of the button is named pause, or like that? That's the part I'm getting. Like, if you're just sending a submit, like, how is it knowing that is supposed to pause the game without you adding in more?
What do you mean? How does it know? I'm saying inside of a state class called pause state, in receive message, it will say if message is equal to back exit, and then you would have a if message equals submit show next screen, which is do you want to quit? If message is back, go back. If message is submit, quit game. There's no complexity, nothing hidden. Everything is written in statements and linear lines, hard-coded directly into the thing. And unrelated to that problem, somewhere, someone might have a button, and the button says, hey, current state, try to pause. And it might do it, or it might not do it. There's nothing complex about it. There's nothing to do with it. And if I want to send
maybe I'm mispicturing your code for your button. I think so. I'm picturing it as a button that just sends a generic message. I think I missed a bit there. So okay,
but that's unrelated. That's my point. Is you're injecting complexity by saying, but if it was a button,
trying to figure out how it actually works.
I'm telling you how it works. If receive the word pause. If receive the word back exit. Like. You're describing
you're just passing in like a string message in that button then?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, not in the button, in the state. The state receives a message.
From the button. So the button has a field.
The button.
How is the button saying that it's the pause button? How do you know that it came from the pause button versus anything else? Is it a different message? Is it a string in the message? I'm trying to figure that out.
It can be anything because it doesn't matter.
It has to be something, right? Like what is something that you would use?
I don't care. Whatever you want to pick, I don't care.
But I wouldn't use any of them. So what would you use?
What I use is I would have, going back to the service locator, I have a thing called game, and I have a method called send. Game.send something. And game.send says current state, receive message.
What does game.send have for parameters, though?
A string.
You just pass in anything like a string?
Sure, why not?
Okay. No, I'm just asking, like, in your actual scenario, like, what do you use? I assume you don't use a string because you don't want to.
No, do you want me to say? I can send you some code. We can have a look at it rather than talking philosophically. I can show you.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting. Cool.
Because I really like it's like really simple. Like I'm trying to demonstrate that like whenever you say button, you're adding complexity because a button is like inputs and clicks and event systems. There's all this extra stuff tied to it. And what I'm saying is we are sending a message. The message might be .pause or it might be string pause.
What the message looks like, I guess. Like what your message setups look like.
I've been feeding this entire conversation to my AI friend, and the AI actually has a definitive answer here. The AI has said Jason is right.
Oh, okay, good. I thought we solved that.
Yes, and there was a comment saying that I think I'm missing the point that static events on classes are event buses, and I think that was my entire point, is that they already exist and do that, and that adding another more generic one just hides the place that they're coming from, because it wraps them all into a single static class that they're all passing through instead of coming from the one that should be firing them off. But this is it's definitely an interesting conversation. It's way more fun than when we completely agree on stuff.
Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to in our Discord channel here, I'm going to send you a little Unity package, and you can have a look at this and tell me what you think from an architecture perspective. Where is your?
Oh, looks like Andrew's got to get going too. I actually got to drop off in just a few too. So. Do you want to come back next week? We'll do like a full review on it and talk about it?
We can do this as a different thing.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we can talk about it and go through the whole thing. I think it'd be interesting, and you'll probably end up converting me, but we'll see.
It's one of those things. Like I said, there's like, because I know 100%. The frustrating part is I know what you're saying, and people think that I'm missing what you're saying, but like I'm trying to highlight that I have done the networking stuff, and if the only statement was you should not use enterprise grade event busing solutions for when you need two objects to talk to each other, I think we both know we won't disagree on there. That's not the problem we're having. There's clearly
that's the problem that
thing.
I see often, though. That's the thing.
But this is what I'm saying is you're fighting ghosts. You're saying, well, in cases I've seen this bad thing, the bad thing is bad. And I'm like, I agree with you. The bad thing you saw bad times is bad. But what I'm saying is that's unrelated to the conversation we're having, which is the question of what is the value and use of event buses in a game engine in this particular case. And I'm demonstrating that, like, just because you haven't seen it done this way, it's nothing to do with event buses. It's an unrelated problem that certain solutions in certain domains are used differently, but there's a like underlying principle behind all of this. You know, when you do X, you should do Y, and it holds true regardless of all of these things. And I'm failing at explaining it, but the point is that, like, to me, all of these things are implementations above it. Like, you say event like it's a part of the universe, but event is a system. An event is a design pattern built on the observer pattern that was only added to C# after like version 2 or whatever.
Yeah, it was in 2.
Yeah. So the point is, this thing that you're describing is almost like an intrinsic part of the universe, was a design pattern with abstractions and architecture that's already there. And so what I'm getting at is that was designed to solve a problem, and it does. And an event bus solves a problem. And it's unrelated to what problem an event mediator solves. And it's unrelated to what an event broker solves. Each one of these is a completely different thing, solves different things, and have different use cases. And I was hoping to get that far, but like we're still, like I'm still struggling with the mediator problem of understanding between what queues and like we can't get to the actual complex part is way downstream. We haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, I felt like it would be a long conversation, but an interesting one. There was a question here on doing crossovers with Primogen and CodeMonkey and them. CodeMonkey would definitely be cool to get him on sometime. I've talked to him about it before.
I'm pretty sure he said he'd want to be on the show at some point.
Yeah, I think it's really just on timing. And now that we're much more flexible on it, maybe we can hit him up and see if he'd like to hop on sometime and just chat. Yeah. I think it would be fun. Primogen, I've actually messaged a couple times. I actually gave him shit for making my kid not like C# either. Somebody called him out on it, that he hates clean code and C#. I was like, oh yeah. I actually messaged him about that. I was like, I think you're the reason my kid thinks C# is terrible and likes all these.
Well, funnily enough, like despite sounding like someone who hates clean code, he's probably got the closest analog to a belief system that I do compared to anybody else. Because when you hear him actually talk about code, he's like, I write code I like writing. And the way he talks about it is, does it solve the problem? It's not like, that's what I want people to do. Like, I believe clean code, quote unquote, solves more problems than he does. But the reasoning he's gotten to his approach is the same reasoning I take. I don't mind if people come to a different conclusion, but the problem I have is when people talk about solutions without going through the reasoning of whether or not it applies in the appropriate situations.
Andrew, you got any thoughts?
No. It's a trap. No, I have none.
All right. Well, I think it'll be a fun discussion next week too. We can kind of go in more and go over some actual code to kind of dive in. I think that would be fun.
Yeah, the kind of like, at least the bookend. The point is to say that, like, the reason I'm saying I agree with you, event bus is bad up to a certain point. But what I try to get to is that when I build a system that starts out really simply as just like pause and unpause, at some point you get all the way to the point of like, you could theoretically, if you wanted these features, end up with a terminal command system that can fire commands into a system, undo and redo, save state and reload state automatically. And all of that is complexity downstream that may or may not occur that would benefit from having a message bus of a single, like all events from the terminal send to one place. But you might not start there, but it's a prime example of when you would want that. If you use Quantum Console, you are using a message bus. That's what you were doing to do that. If you use a terminal in your game, you're already doing these kinds of things. And what I'm getting at is that you can't just talk about a component like this. You have to get to the architectural problem that earns that particular architectural solution. And the problem is that you're describing that you should not use the message bus for the dog problem, and we agree. But what I'm saying is that's not the full story. There's like way more to discuss.
Right. Yeah, there are scenarios where it definitely makes sense, but I just feel like for most of the time, most of the developers, they're not in those scenarios when they end up pulling it in. They start pulling it in because it's neat. It seems like it's making things easier. And then eventually they start to find the problems and hit them when they start debugging and shit gets complex.
Yeah, and we agree on that, but I just don't think that's a helpful debate or conversation to have, because that's like saying if you have too much of the food, if you have too much spicy food, you'll get sick. And it's like, well, it's in the name, too much. If you have too much of something, it's
no,
bad.
it's more if they have it too early, because this is more a scenario of them using a thing that they don't need that they might need in the future before they need it. And that
what was the first thing I said at the start of this call? Wasn't it use something as far as you're comfortable with it and don't use it if it's too complicated for you? Isn't that how I opened
don't
this
use
entire
it if you don't need it? Like don't use things that you don't need until you need them, and then at least in my experience, I've used a shitload of things that I didn't need before I needed them, and every single time I regretted it. So that's been,
well, again, and me too. I agree. I do agree. It's just I think it's purely a lack of understanding what these things are for. That's the real point, right? It's not like don't use things that are complicated. That will ruin your code. I think we both agree on that. But I think there are more cases where you would use a message queue or a message bus if you could separate the concept of it being an enterprise tool from the actual technical solution it solves. And
I think of it more as an asynchronous tool, as a thing where you use when you have things that you need to wait for and you don't have immediate timings on stuff.
And I'm saying any question you ask in a code environment, even a local one, you don't know if it is or is not, and it is by definition an asynchronous problem, because you are always saying
wrong. There are lots of questions. Most questions I ask, I know immediately what the answer is. And 99% of the code I write, the answer is right there on the left-hand side, and I'm not waiting on anything.
You've never written a line of code. It's like get something, and then a piece of software, the disk runs a bit slow, it skips, and it takes a couple of seconds to return. Right? It's slower. Now you might be saying, yeah, but that's not really the same thing.
2007 on Vanguard. No, things get loaded into memory. And even the only time I've ever had that scenario is network messages or, like I said, log writing, but those are solved problems by other people that I don't have to implement the queue myself. I just message it in and the queue should work. Or I might have to build my own network queue, but they should.
Yes, but this is what I'm saying is that because you didn't build a computer, because you didn't build the operating system, because you didn't build the assemblies, because you didn't build, like, you have no control over all of this stuff. So when you say the word, I get the response back immediately. You are saying, when I send a message here and it goes through all of these layers, I get the message back here. And what you're describing is instantly is a layer where you didn't control any of that. And what I'm saying is,
I don't want to continue execution until I've got the answer. The answer should be in milliseconds or microseconds. Right.
But the intrinsic part I'm getting at here is you don't control the answer to that question.
Right. So but if it takes longer, I can't continue on anyway. The game code can't go on without the answer to most questions. If I have to wait a second to get the position of an object before determining if it's out of range and it's all locally in memory on my system, the game is going to freeze and wait a second because there's something seriously fucking wrong. Like it's not right. Like it means that their computer broke and the game froze, and that's not something that I should be handling and waiting like, oh, well, I needed this position, but now I want to wait for it. So, and that's almost all the scenarios, or I should get the answer immediately unless I'm hitting an external service or some external hardware.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that instantly is not a universal constant. The whole point of writing code is asking questions to a system and getting answers back.
It's not about instant. It's about, do I want to wait, or am I waiting for it to answer? And do I need to lock and wait, which is the case, right? When I say instantly, I mean like I'm not continuing any execution of the program. Maybe some other shit in other threads could, but I'm not continuing until I've read that value and I've got the answer to that thing. I guess instantly is probably not the right word for it, but I mean, like, I don't continue until after, and that's most.
And in the same vein, because you're accepting that statement, is what I'm saying. Just like all the other, just like the videos you've done on abstraction, on the separation of things, is the same thing is true. Is that holds true now? That right now that operation is so fast it comes back instantly. If later on that operation decides you have to iterate a bunch of stuff and calculate some total or something, it can range from being slightly slower to maybe being a network thing later. And all I'm saying is that the actual question you're asking, you don't control how long the response comes back, and you're baking in, without realizing it, the intrinsic relationship of, I presume in all cases this thing will always return within X amount of time. And that is not something you control. And the whole point of software architecture...
It's an assumption that you should feel safe making, though, if you're building a game. The object, that your character object is always there, and it's not going to just randomly disappear. Because it should only randomly disappear if there's a serious bug or somebody's hacking your shit. Right?
And I'm saying this is the point of software architecture. You have to understand these relationships, and you're actively trying to architect for and around them. And by baking in the presumption of, it's like saying, I'll always be able to get the file from the computer. If you take that assumption, you miss all the time.
That's an assumption where you're hitting other hardware. Right?
Yeah. So you're not hitting other hardware when you write your code.
No.
Code isn't running on hardware. That's not yours.
When I'm writing code, that shit is all, the stuff I'm talking about has all been loaded in memory. It's already there. I'm not hitting the hard drive to load it. If I'm loading something asynchronously from the hard drive, it's gonna be a totally separate system and not in a message queue system where I'm waiting for it. It's gonna be in something that's kicking it off and probably preloading it in the background or showing some screen while they're waiting. But I'm not hitting the hard drive and dynamically loading stuff constantly. No. And if I were, that's a scenario where I would say, like, equip this item, kick off a thread, do it in an async, make a new task and have it just do it there and wait. I wouldn't want to send a message and then say, hey, go load this item. And then when you're finished loading this item into memory, send me back another message and then I'll put it on. I would just have an asynchronous call to load the item and then on success, equip it. It all in that one method, not have a back and forth between multiple systems. Would be my guess. Well, it would probably be a back and forth between the loading system. Asset loading system, load, give me this thing asynchronously. We'll await it and then pop it up. Oh, sorry, Andrew, you got to get going. We probably should get going anyway. We've been.
Yeah.
I'll let you get the last word though, Jason, before we go.
Yeah, I don't think we disagree on any of the implementations that you're describing. I think just broadly what I'm saying is that I don't think they're the same problems that we're describing. I think fundamentally there is the way you should think about solving problems, and then there's the code you write. And in one area, you're saying in some cases you should separate and architect things out so that you prepare for the worst to happen in certain cases. And what I'm getting at is that there's a lot of assumptions you don't realize you're making, like the file system will always be there, the RAM will be always there. And I'm not saying that it's a bad assumption to just take that for granted, but what I'm saying is you may not appreciate that you are making that assumption. There are some things you just take for granted, others you don't. And the line where you say, this doesn't require a message bus or not, is arbitrary on the basis that you take these things is always true, these things is not always true, these things might be true, and you're vaguely choosing that message bus here and not here, but that's not I don't like to work that way because it's too vague. There's too much of it, like, I trust the hard drive is always there, but I also don't trust that it might not be networked or whatever. So I try to come up with a rubric that applies in all circumstances. And so the rules I'm trying to build to is saying, if you go through the step-by-step the way I'm describing, you get to an answer going, and this works in this scenario, as opposed to saying, I don't think it does, or I do think it does. It's if you step through it sort of, from a Socratic approach, you will get there. Again, clearly I'm failing to describe it, but it's like, it's very complicated. It's a reasoning thing more than it is code, right?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting discussion. I think we'll talk about it more next week too. There's a lot of chat about it too. It's one of the most active ones in there. Andrew, before we go, you want to really quickly call out your things that are on sale again?
Gotta get them all. Currently it's the 2 low poly character bundles. So if you don't have those, now's an amazing time to get 40 39 characters. 39 characters. They work well with Cinti, as somebody recently found out. She was looking for Cinti compatible monsters, and well, here's a whole bunch. So, yeah,
They look great.
And-
I actually just pulled one in a couple days ago to another project playing around.
yeah.
I do love the Derpy Bird. That every time I see that, that's particularly fun. You know?
Derpy Bird. I should rename it to Derpy Bird. Yeah, when we fix the battler, we should use these ones.
Oh yeah, definitely. Let's do that. We'll put them all in for the giveaway on the next one. And speaking of giveaway, for anybody that wants to win a copy of VTabs, just comment. I guess put VTabs in the comments, and I'll just pick one at random in the next couple days and send you over a code. So I'll message you on YouTube, or I'll just reply. Actually, I'll just reply to the winning comment, and then you can email me and we'll get it sent over.
We should probably revisit the battler. Definitely, we should. It'd be fun to kind of dig that up and go again at trying to make a few changes to it.
I agree. It would be fun. We could probably just rewrite the whole thing again.
Yeah.
Just take the YouTube reading code is the only part that's was pain, and AI can do that.
Yeah. We'll just have to decide which kind of event system to use.
Yes.
I have no real opinions. Whatever you guys want to.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Oh, that's a sleeping baby. Going by.
Perfect timing. It seems. Yeah.
She got worn out on her trip. Yeah. Don't forget to like and subscribe and all that stuff. We'll be back next week. We'll have a bigger debate about events and other code stuff, and then we'll get the battler running too. All right. I'm going to find the button and say goodbye wherever it is.
Bye, everyone.